First of all, thanks. This is a role I've been in for just over a year. And tonight I want to just talk to you about really kind of setting up and dealing with, I want to, like, as we've seen, the soccer discipline, how to set up different procedures and processes. So let me see if I can advance here. So of course, one of the first things we try to capture here is when all else fails is when we end up in discipline, right? And so I've taken a few things as I deal with discipline also in the policing environment. Of course, we all have that whole part of it, which says we can't fix stupid, but in this case, but we can give it and we'd call this a panel or a hearing date. And as we often see in this whole world, is it's a blame game. You know, I didn't say it was your fault, but I have to blame somebody for what happened here in terms of it. I'm going to go pretty fast through this because some of you may be involved in discipline and already aware. And for some of you, you may not. It may be something new to you, but always will make myself available through, it's a simple email of BC Soccer Discipline through the BC Soccer. Jesse Bassey deals a lot with it and communicates. If there's any questions at all for anything, I'd rather answer the question than have somebody make a mistake there. So really, you know, BC Soccer has its own process chart, which is a pretty simple one. It can be found in the Judicial Code. It can also be found on the complaint forms, which speaks to a very simple process. Since a complaint of misconduct is received, we get it. We see if there's a breach of the rules. If there's not, then we could seek additional information. And if there is, we can head it over to a discipline hearing in terms of it. This is the same type of process you would see yourself setting up within your own district or within your own club, and that. It's really much just setting out a process chart for when you receive a complaint, what happens to it? Who does it go to? Who makes a decision? Is it something that needs more information? Is it something that's not discipline, isn't misconduct? Or is it something that clearly is and it moves on? For a lot of places who have the referees, of course, referee reports are taken at face value, and generally the leagues are dealing with those. BC Soccer, there is within the BC Soccer Judicial Code certain types of misconduct that shall be reviewed by BC Soccer. So obviously things like physical assaults, language and or profanity directed at a match official, abuse of a match official, intimidating. And as you see by this, you start to see that these are pretty serious allegations that come in. One of the things to look at is, and we do take complaints from different provincial associations or misconduct by an association of members, people who are associated, such as district board members, club board members, and of course, things that happen at BC Soccer provincial or regional competitions. Having said that, just because it comes to BC Soccer doesn't mean that it's going to land and stay there. Once we get it, we tend to take a look at, myself, after reviewing it, looks at, are we going to investigate the complaint further? Which usually in every instance outside of a referee's report, we will write to the person who's being complained about, telling them that we've received this complaint and asking them if there's any information they want to provide. Sometimes we are inviting them that, it may be clear that we're going to go to a discipline proceeding and advising of that, but asking them for it. We also have, or my role is to look at whether we refer the complaint to a member or affiliated organization, so club, district, league, for review. That may be, as you see in the other ones, we've had times when a referee may have been sworn at in a game, they've issued a red card, and we've referred it back to the league or a club, or basically in those cases a league, because it's happened in league play, for them to conduct a discipline hearing on it. Mainly we'll take a look at whether the player has any other past misconduct and to if there's anything aggravating or we believe that it can happen, that they can deal with it. We also have the ability here to create an ethics panel, which is to look at some of the behaviors and see whether the complaint has merit, and they have an ability to reach out and ask people and gather information. So that's kind of a very high overview of what BC Soccer is. And I want to move towards what happens, like how do districts, clubs, even leagues, and that set up and follow their own discipline as required. Just to give you an idea, BC Soccer shouldn't be handling the vast majority of matters. I believe when we look at the Ontario Soccer Association as to what happens there, there's probably less than a dozen are actually handled by the league at that time. Handled by the provincial association. The majority of it is referred back, it's traced, it's tracked, and advice is given. So quick overview on just setting up your own type of discipline processes. And this is just the early part is we're going to deal with things like acknowledging receipt of the complaint. Who should address the complaint? When I say that, is it a club issue? Is it a league issue? Is it a district issue? Informing the affected parties of the concern. So who are you telling? Who are you keeping advised about what happens? Part of what everything needs to have, as I always say, is the justification for how, or the authority for how you're going to deal with it. Most clubs have bylaws and districts and that have bylaws or constitutions that talk about how discipline is to be handled. Usually it specifies the processes and it may be very basic. And if it isn't there in existence, then you can refer to the BC Soccer processes as kind of the higher governing body for finding those roles. You know, most of again, clubs and districts, you have to look at, do you have a discipline coordinator? Somebody who's going to receive complaints, somebody who's going to be able to contact BC Soccer as a consistent and contact myself to get advice or guidance. And do you have established processes for discipline that aligns with the leagues, district, and BC Soccer? When I say aligns, in other words, you get the idea as to whether you're going to handle it, whether you're going to pass it on, and what is what is it within your realm, and what is within another body's responsibility. Process here is perhaps the biggest challenge. Making sure the process is fair and making sure that the process that, as you've outlined it, is followed. It's becoming more and more important as we see some serious matters. And we see also a lot of people, or there are a significant number of people who get paid to do work in and around the soccer organizations, either as technical directors, coaches, head coaches. So when we talk about suspending people or imposing conditions, there can be financial penalties that go along with it. So process will be one of the biggest things that we will look at, or eventually I don't see, but could be where appeals are heard because the process wasn't fair, process wasn't consistent, or the process just wasn't laid out. Who makes up a discipline panel and what decisions by the panel need to be referred to the club's board of directors for implementation. A lot of times, and I've got a slide coming up that says, club issues are going to be things between internal within the club, and district, of course, are going to be within the district, usually what happens between clubs in a given district. Note, this also refers to things such as board of director misconduct in their roles as a director. That would normally we'd see be handled by the club or the district, perhaps, in terms of where they find themselves at present. Just a sec here. So what we have is leagues, districts, and clubs. We talk about having an assigned discipline coordinator, someone who receives the complaints, someone who makes the referral to another body if it's appropriate, such as the ones that are outlined in the BC Soccer Code as to where they will handle it, acknowledges the issue. One of the big things we always make to make sure is we acknowledge that it's come in, seeks out additional information as required, seeks advice if needed, and advises those involved of the next steps. You either set a date for a hearing or you acknowledge the complaint has no merit, which can occur. So as you walk through the steps, normally we see that clubs will deal with internal matters within the club. Leagues will handle matters within the Judicial Code, game incidents, player coach conduct in games. That's pretty much how the league deals with it. It happened within a scheduled game. It happened within their scheduled events. And then, of course, district will often be seen as dealing with matters between clubs in the district, some game incidents that are intra-district, player and coach conduct, and perhaps even if it is an internal matter referred by the club because there may be seen as a conflict. The judicial code hearing process is laid out, and it's within the judicial code, but clearly, and without going into it, that when every line here, clearly what it is though is there is a process when you're holding it. There's a process to make sure the allegations are clear, the person has an opportunity to respond to it, panel members have an opportunity to question people, and panel members also have an opportunity, if they want, to adjourn the matters so that they can seek out additional information should they need to, or find themselves. Upon receipt of a complaint, each level should have a designated discipline representative to receive it, acknowledge it. Questions that you may want to ask is, does the complaint involve parties from different clubs or organizations? Why was it sent to you? That's a good question. Do they expect that you're going to deal with it? And did the conduct occur as part of a sanctioned game or event? And that's where I talk about that becomes pretty easy to refer it to another body such as the league. After receiving a complaint, again, just considering whether you're the appropriate body, if you don't think you are, or if you're not, then refer it to the appropriate body. Make sure that you document that you've passed it on to and who you've passed it on to. And of course, if you are the appropriate body, at least advise the accused that a complaint has been registered and ask for a response to it. And determine if the complaint has merit or not. Last year, about 50% of the complaints that came to BC Soccer were simply dismissed because they had no merit. It may have been people just disagreed with a decision, but misconduct is just not getting a decision wrong. Misconduct means that there's some blameworthy action that's occurred in terms of it. And of course, if yes, then there may be a need to convene a disciplinary panel. Most disciplinary panels are comprised of a minimum of 3 individuals. And when we say look for true conflicts of interest, when soccer is a small world, it's very large. Of course, it's spread out throughout the world, but it's very small in terms of the number of volunteers that we have. Don't always look to excuse someone just because they know somebody or from a similar club or organization. You're looking for true conflicts when somebody is going to be there. And a manager of a team would not sit on a hearing of a coach of the same team. There's a true conflict for it. Somebody who was involved in the incident has a true conflict of it. Somebody who has something to gain by a decision has a true conflict. And panels must make the decision on the evidence and material presented in the process. I've seen on occasion here, and we have to be very cautious, is not to inject new evidence while in discussions and the accused is not present. You can't get together later saying, the panel and say, oh, I heard, or I know this person, or I've got some information that you may not be, that you're not aware of. That is simply not appropriate. You make the decisions based on the material that's presented within it. When it comes into the hearing, you're looking to establish a hearing chairperson, reading out the allegation, asking them for a reply. It is the panel or the board who asks the questions. You want to watch for new evidence being brought forward and consider whether you need to adjourn to consider the material, seek clarity, or seek additional information on it. And just a caution here, that is, if witnesses are present, then they present to the panel and the panel can ask questions, not the accused. I know most people see it. This is not a criminal trial, as we'd like to call it, where people get to cross-examine it. It is the panel that gets to ask the questions. The accused gets to be present and hear the evidence of the witness, but they do not get to should not be in a cross-examination. The accused can ask the panel or point out discrepancies to the panel, and then they should be, but it should not come down to what we call a cross-examination, an adversarial approach. And the witness should only be present when they're giving their evidence. They don't stick around. They don't sit in there, just to watch or see what's happening. They should give their evidence and be moving on. Results from panels need to be communicated and should be recorded. When I say by that, registered in the minutes, registered in a discipline log. And if the accused member is not present when you make a decision, because in a lot of cases, even with BC Soccer, they hear the evidence, they let the person go, and they communicate the decision later. It should be in written form with copies to the appropriate parties. Records should be maintained for reporting on an annual basis, and appeals from decisions made by various levels are to the BC Soccer Appeals Chair, not to myself. I just want to, this is, and coming close to the end here, is suspension timelines. There's been a thought, or there's been discussion on when someone gets a suspension, whether it be for a number of weeks, months, or whatever, what happens when we get into Christmas breaks, what happens when snow happens, what happens when COVID hits. And while this is kind of a guideline that has been issued by myself, is the basic gist of what we've said is suspension timelines in general, if you give it for a defined period of time, should run continually unless otherwise stated by the panel that delivers the decision. So if you're on the coastal league or coastal area and it's February and you issue a 6-month suspension, unless you say the suspension ceases at the end of the playing season and recommences on this date, it should be viewed that the timeline is simply going to be continuous in terms of it. This has come up again, as I say, when play is stopped, when COVID suspension in play happened, and simply put, that when you issue it for a period of time, unless you define that there's a stoppage in the time, or there's basically a suspension of the period of time, then it will run continually. The other aspect I want to touch on for that is topical to some is the issue of private communications. Twice now, I've been asked to review matters that have looked at where communication has happened, and that communication, which possibly was meant to be private between two individuals, has become not private. It's been discovered by somebody else, it's been passed on. And panels or discipline bodies have considered that misconduct didn't occur because they felt that it was meant to be private. The simple fact is, whether or not it was intended to be private, if the content of communications is inappropriate, then it fits within the description, and it fits within the description of the allegation, then it's irrelevant of whether the person, said, well, I didn't mean for anyone else to see it. I only expected my best friend to see it. The fact is, it has been spread. It has become non-private. And that itself suffices to establish that the communication exists and it's inappropriate. In other words, you can't have even inappropriate communication between two people. Once it becomes discovered, it has to be addressed. The BC Soccer Judicial Code is the guide for procedures and decisions. Think of 3 basic steps when making and dealing with it. Did the actions or inactions actually occur? Were those actions or inactions misconduct as it's defined? And was there any justifiable reason for the breach? And don't confuse mitigating factors with defining whether the actions were misconduct. Mitigating factors are relevant when considering appropriate sanctions. So in other words, I was acting wildly. I didn't mean to punch the other player. I was flailing my arms, wildly because I don't know. I was having a moment. Doesn't say that, did the actions occur? Yes, you struck another player. Were they justified? Were they defined as misconduct? Yes, they were. Is there any justifiable reason for it? If the answer is no, then it's misconduct. And then the mitigating factors may be, well, there was no intent. I was just reckless. And therefore, the panel consider that as a mitigating when considering sanctions. I'm going to skip these kind of recommendations. They were issues that were brought up with BC Soccer during the annual review. And I put it out there at this point. I know it's been quick. I know it's been fast. It can certainly make these slides available. And also, I have no difficulty in spending the time, whether yourself as a league or a district or a club would like to speak about setting the processes up, how to address certain matters. And of course, anything that you can always reach me through the BC Soccer discipline email, as Jesse looks after most of the stuff for me there.